What's up, everyone? This is Jim Davis from the Good Athlete Project. Today's mini lecture is on the balance between support and challenge and how to design a culture for growth. So I'm actually going to start with a story that I'm almost hesitant to share. I've only shared it with a small number of people in my life because honestly it's sort of embarrassing to me. In one of the very first years of my coaching, I was coaching on a varsity football team, and we were, we were down a score at halftime by I remember who the team was, and it was our crosstown rival. One of our senior leaders on the team was, in the opinion of many coaches, kind of underperforming. I was given the task of hyping up one of our big inside linebackers, a big 6 foot, 200-pound high school linebacker. It's a big kid, very talented athlete. So what I did to try to hype this young man up for the second half was essentially replicate the things that I had seen in my own playing career, but with greater intensity. And to make a long story short, I got so intense and challenged this young man so directly, and not in a positive way, that before I knew it, he was in tears. Okay? And I hesitate to go back on it. I can't help but get the chills. I'm picturing this young man's face. We're in a circle preparing to go out in the second half. He's stretching, and there's tears in his face, on his face. And I can't help but, I reflect back on that sometimes to, just in my own personal pursuit of being the best I can be, to try to understand it better. And I understand this is how it works. I saw some things as an athlete. I tried them as a coach. I just turned up the volume on them, and it didn't work. Now, from an ethical perspective, I felt like watching this kid, thinking back on it, it felt like a punch in the gut. I felt terrible because you remember I've said the word a couple times. This was a kid. Okay, I know he looks like a young man, and in many ways he is, but he's a teenager just figuring stuff out, and this is a game. Okay, I'm not saying there's no room for intensity. That's where I lived as a player, hard work and bringing everything I had to every game. But to remember that he is a kid playing a game is something that's been important to me. Anyway, from an ethical perspective, I felt terrible. But from a pure objective performance perspective, there too, it's like, how could that young man possibly go on to perform well in the second half, having been sort of beaten down psychologically in a poor attempt to get him psyched up? So I reflect back on that pretty often, and it really does help me put perspective on this concept. So you cannot grow without challenge. We know that. We should be challenged. I think stress is not a four-letter word. I think stress is essential, and that's not just my opinion. That is science. There is no growth without stress. You stress, you recover, you improve to meet the demands of the previous stressor. That's how it works. Okay, so you must have challenge, but it's only in that stress recovery balance that the growth happens. Same when setting up a coaching culture. So you've got challenge, you've got support. This might look familiar to some people, and there's sort of a sweet spot, and we're looking for performance/skill acquisition. Okay, I don't know if you can read this, my writing from there, but performance and skill acquisition, that's happening at an increasing and improving level in this zone. That's challenge, that's support. Now, you'll recognize this. First of all, I know it looks a lot like, theoretically, like the zone of proximal development. Zone of proximal development is Vygotsky. The flow research comes from Csikszentmihalyi. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that exactly correct, but the research is out there. The theory, the model is familiar, but here's how it looks in a coaching setting. Support and challenge. So let's look over here. If the challenge is too low and the support is too high, okay, there's no growth. Okay, you can't possibly have growth there. There's not enough challenge. There's too much support, too much comfort. We've all seen this play out. It's like the way that an unchallenged muscle will atrophy, okay, shrink essentially. So will one's psychology. You cannot pull back on challenge and increase support and expect for growth in any important way. Now, if you move to the opposite end here, and you have plenty of challenge, more than enough challenge, but not enough support, same idea. You got people who burn out, or you got your starting middle linebacker in tears before the second half of the game, right? The key is to find this zone in the culture of your team, and if at all possible, in each individual athlete. Now, the way that breaks down usually is, because I know that seems like a lot of work, the head coach sets the culture day after day after day. The position coaches do their best. They have to understand the logic of the head coach. It has to be sort of a trickle-down impact or logic model. But then the position coaches have to take up the task of individualizing this concept for some people. And there's some really easy ways to see this. First of all, this is really easy. In some of the populations that you can envision this very quickly. With those young men, I'm thinking of young men or women, but young men in an under-supported team on the south side of Chicago, hypothetically, who have maybe experienced trauma in some point in their lives. To jump up in that kid's face and yell, you will start a cascade of stress responses that will essentially put up a barricade between that young person and whatever lesson you were trying to install. That would be too much challenge, not enough support. So having an understanding of what that young person has been through is vital in finding the balance between these two things. Now, it does seem hard, and there's no easy fix. Okay, that's the truth. So if you're not willing to do this work, I don't want to be too tough on it, but maybe education and coaching and human development is not the right job, because you got to be willing to do the work. The good news is, I'm not trying to scare anybody away. The good news is, the more you do it, coach, teacher, leader, mentor, the easier it becomes. You develop a fitness for this sort of approach and this sort of thinking. So 4 key areas. Again, I'm not sure if you can see them from the camera, but trust, exposure, guidance, and appraisal. And they work in that order. So trust, you have to build trust if you are going to expose young people to challenge. Okay? You have to build trust if you're going to expose young people to challenge. One of the most common flaws is exposing people to challenge and toughness and all that sort of stuff before they trust you or their environment. Okay? Growth will not happen there. You'll throw the balance off. Exposure. You cannot have growth without exposure to challenge. That's the other real truth. You can't expect to become stronger if you don't expose your muscle fibers and nervous system to challenging loads. I could do this on air all the time. My bench press isn't going to go up. Or I could challenge it with weight, with speed, with intensity, all that kind of stuff. I have to be exposed to challenge in order to grow. Guidance. The more complicated the environment becomes, the more guidance becomes essential. Right? If you are in a football game or in a swimming meet or water polo or tennis, whatever it might be, trusting your environment is key. That allows you to get into a state of exposure to challenge. And once you experience that exposure, you need to be sort of guided through it. And there are varying ways and degrees of doing that. That's where a lot of the coaching pedagogy is focused, is the guidance part. And then it's appraisal. And then it is essentially a debriefing, a reflection. Well, you trust your environment. You were exposed to a challenge. We guided you through it. Maybe we called a play or whatever it might be. The appraisal is essentially, did it work? And what level of ownership do we have in that outcome? Okay, the play did not work. Why? Well, I cut my slant route off too flat, and you take a 45-degree angle, hypothetically, but you get it. It's an advancing hierarchy there from trust to appraisal, but that is the key to coaching. That is happening nonstop, this sequence over and over and over and over again. And what we have recognized in our work at the Good Athlete Project is that more often than not, it falls flat or isn't as successful as we wanted, not because the coaches don't know what they're talking about in terms of strategy or because the athletes are too limited, but because we've neglected to strike the right balance between challenge and support. It is the work of a season, of a career, for many of a lifetime. It's not easy, but it is absolutely worth it. When you hit the sweet spot, there's just nothing like it. For support, reach out. Questions, reach